To cut my sashing strips for my minis, I want 1 inch by 4 inches to go in between. That way I'll have a nice 1/2 inch sashing between. So I could simply bring in my regular ruler and do my 1 inch strips this way. But it's more fun if I use the Stripology ruler. So my Stripology ruler makes things a bit quicker because I can do all my inch strips in one go without having to lift that ruler at all. I'm using the main beige fabric that I pulled in for this project. This beige fabric is not part of the layer cake that I was using earlier. And so this matches all my fabrics, and I wanted to sort of have a continuity to go into my sashing. I am going to cut my sashing strips using the Stripology by first folding my fabric. And so I've actually folded it twice, and that will give me 4 pieces. The reason why it doesn't go all the way to the salvage there is because that's where I was using it for my squares. In order to fit it under the Stripology, I do need to have it in a smaller width. And I think I'm going to go ahead and cut off this salvage here just so that I can have a little bit. All right, I'm going to fold the fabric so that I get a nice clean edge over here. And I'm trying to line my sides up and my fold here. I like to cut from the fold. That helps to give me a nice straight piece when I'm done, although I'm getting ready to cut this into 4 inch strips, so it's not as important on this mini. When I'm using my Stripology, I like to line up vertically up here on that first black line. I'm sorry, this is the horizontally on this first black line. And then I'm going to come in a little bit on my 0 mark. And then this will cut off my salvage so that I have a nice clean 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch, whatever I need strip. So the Stripology goes in 1/2 inch increments. So I'm going to follow the inch mark. And when I use my rotary cutter with the Stripology, I make sure my blade is all the way open. I start at the 0 mark. That's going to get rid of my salvage so that I have a nice clean mark. Then I'm going to go to the 1 inch and to the 2 inch and to the 3 inch. Remember, we need about 50 of these for this project. Only thing about the Stripology that I don't like is that I can get a little carried away and cut way more than I need, just because it's so much fun. Now when I lift up the Stripology and move it over to the side, all my strips are ready to go for the next step. Now, of course, the Stripology comes in numerous sizes, and so this one is the smallest I believe it comes in, and it's perfect for these minis because now I'm going to cut my 4 inches. I wanted to show you how I can stack those the strips so that I can get more cuts at once. So what I do is I use the lines on my cutting surface so that I can make several rows and I can then cut them up at the same time. Now that I have them nice and lined up, I can come in here and I'm going to do the same thing as I did before. I'm going to line up with one of the vertical lines, and actually can go down a little bit further here. And the more you go, the better. I'm going to cut at that 0 line right here, and then do my then I'm going to come over and do the 4 inch. I can move these away, keep this lined up, and then I can come over and do another 4 inches. And you can see how all of a sudden that cutting of a ton of little pieces becomes a much quicker process. I ended up with a ton of squares. So I'm going to use every single block that I have for a square. If you didn't end up with as many squares as I did, then you can simply take a piece of neutral fabric or a piece of beautiful feature fabric and stick that in your rows of 4. So I have 5 rows of 5, and then I have 4 rows of 4. And so you could easily put those in there and it will look as just as gorgeous. So I am also going to put sashing in between each one of the blocks. So that's where my 1 by 4 sashing comes in. So it's going to look like this. In the center of each sashing, I'm going to have a square. Simply because I have so much left over that I thought, why not? And so that's how it will look when we're finished. How do we get there? We're going to start by doing our sashing in rows like this. So we're going diagonally. And so I'm going to show you how that works. But so the first thing that means is that with my very first block, I can put a sashing on top and a sashing on the one below it, and then the next one and the next one will only have sashings below them. I am blessed to be able to lay the whole quilt out right next to my sewing machine. In the olden days, that would have been on the floor. And so, or I could have my quilt wall behind me, but now I am blessed to have this space. I am going to start in rows. So I'm going to do rows like this. And so I'm actually coming down from the top. So I'm going to start here. And so, like I said, with my top row or the top block in each row, I am going to put 2 of my 1 by 4 inch rectangles, and then I'll only put 1 on the bottom of the other 2, and that way I can chain piece. So I am going to start right here with this square, and I am going to go ahead and put my 4-inch piece right there on the top, just so that I'm ready to go when I get into the sewing machine, and allow me to chain piece. I am sewing with a 1/4 inch seam. This time it doesn't matter what size that 1/4 inch seam is, whether it's scant or large, it just needs to be consistent. This is my first square. It needs both of them, so I'm going to go ahead and pull it out and give its other side a stitch. So that's my first one. This is my second one, but this one's the starting block of that. So I'm going to go ahead and get the other side on there. That way I don't have to worry about it anymore. And I'm going to chain piece the rest of that row. So here's my first row. And I have my second row stitched, but before I pull it out, I'm going to go ahead and get my third row started. So this is my second row. I can now begin putting that together, and I'll just continue that way through all of them. Now that I have all my strips and my squares cut, I am going to start by chain piecing a whole bunch of squares to my 4-inch long pieces. Now that I have a whole string of them, I can start going in 2s and 3s. The very ends only need 1 of these with an extra square on the end. So I'm going to put that one to the side. And they'll continue to grow up to a size 9 on my quilt. If yours is larger or smaller, you might have smaller pieces, but they're always going in odd numbers. So I have 1. The next chain is going to have to be 3. So I'm going to start by putting a green in the center of these purples. And you'll see as you start putting these twos together that they start growing really quickly. Now that I have my pieces all sewn together, I'm going to press them in the opposite direction of my seams. So for my squares, I had pushed my seams outward. And so for all my strips, I'm going to put my seams inward. Now that everything's pressed really nice, I can nest all my seams nicely together. Now she's all laid out with her squares and her sashings. I am now going to stitch those together. So I'm starting at the ends and I'm going to move toward the center. And so by starting at the end, I've already put my sashing on the end piece. And then I moved in and put a sashing here, and then I put a sashing here. Next, I'm going to go to this piece. I'm going to do the center piece, both of them. And then I will move to this one, that one, and move them on out. And so this one gets both of its sashings at the same time. The rest of them are only going to get one of their sashings. And I'm just sort of moving that way. It helps to have it all laid out so you can see what's happening. And so let's get started. If I were putting sashing on a larger quilt, then I would pin each one of these junctions. But this guy's so tiny that I can match seams as I go. So I'm not going to have to worry about that. If you find that you're having a little bit of extra fabric underneath in the block areas, match those seams anyway. The feed dogs will pick up that little bit of extra fabric and ease it right on in. To make all the side triangles, I've taken a 7-inch square and I'm going to cut on the diagonal. Time to change the blade. Now I have all the triangles I need. I need 16 to go around the sides, and then I'll need another 4 that will go on the ends. All my triangles are in place, and now it's time to start sewing. So I've already done this one, and I am going to do it the same way I did my sashing. So I am going to go into the center and then come back into the center, and you notice that my center pieces are just going to get a cornerstone on the end. And so let's get sewing. The nice thing about having everything laid out is that I can still chain piece. So I'm going to start with this one at the bottom and then go to the next 2 rows. All the triangles are on, and now it's time to put the rows together. So make sure when you press the triangles that you press towards the inside of the quilt so that everything will nest beautifully. I'm going to do them in 2s. So I've already done this 2, but I'm going to do this 2. And then just to keep things small, I'm going to do these 2 and these 2. Then I will put everything to the center block. Now that the quilt's getting larger and larger, I am starting to pin a little bit so that it just makes everything go smoother through the machine and faster. So the pinning takes a little bit longer, but the sewing and the goes much faster when everything is already lined up and ready to go. So now all that's left are the corners. So now I'm gonna figure out how I want those to go. And all I have to do is put them over and stick them on, and this main body of the quilt is done. When I place my corner piece down onto the quilt, I am lining up the center of the quilt block with the center of the triangle. And the main body of our mini quilt is together. So now the next step is to put on a border. You could be done at this point. Give it a good press, trim it up and be square, quilt it, bind it, you're ready to go. But what about all those, flying geese that we had? Those are going on the border. So join us for the next video as we finish up the mini quilt series.